I think that something can exist just by the fact that people enjoy it, and not necessarily because they have this new entity there that could potentially do everything that you just did better than yourself. It will probably be a bit shocking and demotivating at first, but I don't think that will kill humans' desire or humans' pleasure from music.
Sponsored by Allfeet, decentralized blockchain solutions for the music industry. Produced by Amplitude Ventures Consulting, partners in early stage music tech. Today, I'm with Pedro Sarmento, a postdoc at the Center for Digital Music in London. We discuss how AI is transforming music from creativity to storytelling and insights from his guitar tablature research. It's a fascinating topic you won't want to miss. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Sound Connections podcast. Today we're going to have a topic that I've talked about a few times on the podcast, but I love to talk about it, and that is AI in music. Pedro, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. Thanks for having me.
Pedro, I follow your profile on LinkedIn, and you're a postdoctoral researcher in this space, and I thought, okay, this can be really interesting. As I talked to you very briefly here before the podcast, a lot of the interviews I've had has been on a very, let's call it theoretical basis or from a very business perspective, where your angle, at least as I perceive it, is very practical. So just before we go into the very, very deep end of all this, could you briefly explain who are you and what do you do?
So I'm a postdoc researcher at the Center for Digital Music in London. That's where I did my PhD as well. My topic was on guitar tablatures with deep learning. And yeah, thank you for saying that the practical part of it. I also think that I'm a guitar player myself, and my whole angle with the PhD was coming from a perspective of a guitar player, I believe so, and trying to work on AI tools that would somehow help. And well, it's a bit of a cliche to say this these days, but not to replace humans in music, and that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, because that's a really interesting topic, not to replace humans in music. Why is that important?
Well, personally, because I think, well, for one, I very much enjoy making music. I would say that most of the music that I enjoy listening to is also made by humans. I still think there's something special about music being made by humans. And the way I would like to contribute to this space would be with tools and approaches and techniques and assistance for music making, not to erase our very unique contribution to music making, I would say.
Yeah. I've been struggling with this concept so much. And for people who listen to the podcast, have probably heard me say it a few times. Like I obviously have been following Suno, Udio, and whatever programs out the most. I definitely prefer Suno because it just generates faster. And this space, yeah. Anyways, that's a deep talk. But I've been making music with my kids. My oldest son, he's very good with lyrics. He remembers everything. So we've sitting, at night, made up lyrics. I sit 20, 30 minutes after he's asleep, finish the lyrics, make a song, play it for him the next morning. And I've sort of been contemplating, what is the future of creativity? Because I'm to be honest, I'm more excited about creativity than music per se. Like creation for me is the interesting aspect. And I've sort of been a bit sad. I don't know if that's the word, but I've been a bit confused about where does music take me. And I think I had a period where I was just a bit like, music is going away somehow. But then, again, I'm just changing my mind because I'm as confused as everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching TV, and I never do that. But there was this program on Norwegian television that was called Every Time We Meet, which is basically just artists playing music for each other, their old catalogs. And I was so touched by it. Like television, totally set up, like nothing, everything is artificial, but it's still like, humans playing human music for other people. And it just struck me again, like, nah, I'm actually doubtful that human connection, even on a fabricated format like TV, would go away. I think there's still going to be space for and much more space than I first anticipated. How do you feel about all that? Like, why do you believe that there's room for people in the future?
Well, for once, I 100% agree with that. I think, and I'm pretty sure that there won't be a replacement of these very human feeling that you get when you listening to listen to or you interact with some sort of human-made music. I think. I also even going a bit further. I don't think that these new AI tools enter that sphere so much. I think the problem comes when you talk about income and remuneration, not so much about creativity or the sense of art making or human art. There are very interesting studies actually that uh, talk about what would be machine-made art, not art made by machines trained on human art. If you follow what I'm saying, but um, to get a sense that art is at its core a very or a unique human capability, at least as we understand it. So I don't definitely think that humans or this feeling that you get from listening to human music will ever be lost. And I'm not even touching on points such as, say, for example, you like a band. Sometimes you like that band not only because the way they sound or how they play, but for many factors, maybe because of who they are, maybe because of what they do live or the kind of causes even sometimes that they support. So there's a whole very biological kind of aspect of your attraction to music that I think um, AI poses no threat to.
Yeah, I I think you're right. Um, but also when I look at sort of the progression, and again, I use Suno the most in examples just because I believe that they do the best. And for example, they came out with V4, I guess, 4 weeks ago, which is their new model. And I did a trick. I've been using Suno since it sort of came out, and I took a lot of the V3s that I have made and basically remastered it with V4. And hearing the difference from compositions I've made or prompted, whatever you want to call it, to a V4 setting where like I've spent hours and hours and hours per song prompting it just right and changing as much as I can, to then transfer into a V4 and just keeping that uniqueness of melody and sound that V3 had, but then into the improved auditory experience of V4. And it's like, fuck, like I don't know what to think about this, because the way that I say it is I've worked in publishing for a few years. And I say if I was a publisher, I would hire that guy. Like I would sign him. And when technology comes so far that it competes with, you know, people who've been creative for 6-7 years, then I don't know what the future holds, if that makes sense.
It,
Um,
it
does it make
yeah,
sense?
it does make a lot of sense, and it kind of touches upon what I was saying. So when you said you would hire him, that would implicitly mean that you would, I guess, pay him as well. So that's when money, remuneration, income comes in. And I do agree with you. I think there will be changes. There will be some sort of slight revolution, if you want, because if you're looking at music from a more, well, I don't want to say functional as purely functional. There's 100% a lot of creativity that goes on in prompting a model, trimming, playing with tools like Suno. But my take on it is that if you're, at least at the stage that we are, if you're a professional musician, it's hard for you to maybe express what you want to express specifically coming from the way or the workflow that you were used to by just using words. I think this type of approach, music making, it's great for people that want to be creative in the music space, and maybe without tools like that wouldn't have an opportunity to be so. But it's quite disruptive if you think of, professional musicians, bands, the way they want to express their sound, their music. It's usually hard to put in a sentence or two paragraphs. So I think we're talking about two different ways, and also that both of them can coexist in this space. On the other hand, I also think that if you're doing music for advertisement or for a more functional or commercial application, like I was saying, maybe you would think twice in hiring someone versus doing it yourself on Suno or Udio. And this will, I think, make some changes in the way, or more on the market side of things, not as much on the creative side of things. I don't think, uh, personally, that musicians feel threatened from a creativity perspective. I don't think any creator or musician feels like, well, these machines are more creative than me, even because there's hardly any competition when it comes to creativity, right? But there will be, in the functional space, there will definitely be some changes, I believe.
Yeah, and one counter argument to that, though, that I'm sort of exploring myself right now is I'm a over enthusiastic person, and I always try to do new stuff. And 4 months ago, I decided to start programming because there's a program that came out called Cursor. And I had done HTML a bit when I was younger, and I did study 1 year of electrical engineering, like yourself,
Uh,
but dropped out. So I had like basic programming experience. I understood, what it is, and I understood what a terminal was and stuff like that. But that was about it. And now Amplitude Ventures has around 13 developers, full-time developers, in our company where we build AI agents. And I'm really good with context. I'm really good with conceptualization. And my developers are really talented. I could beat any of them in speed, any of them. And I don't have a development background, but what I do have a background, I have a background of creation. So I can build full-scale products in 2.5, 3 hours, get them deployed, function on the internet. And no, none of them can do that. But of course, it's not going to be sustainable products that can be full-scale digitalized, the SaaS products. So I'm not saying that I can do that, but if you compare that to the future of creators, I believe that's where the shift is going to be in like the practical aspect of creativity. There's going to be people who understand how to tell stories in a really freaking fast manner. And I'm a firm believer, I'm often wrong, but I am a firm believer in oftentimes quality comes from quantity. Just make with good intent, just making shit tons of stuff. And then you can sort of sort out the good parts. And that's sort of where I'm trying to get at with music. I believe, even though we can't transfer that directly, that there might be some truth to it when it comes to future creators of music. That might be, again, I'm just using my son as an example, that's very musical, understanding lyrics. He might create in a fundamentally different way than I did when I learned music. And I think there's also going to happen a shift there that's going to change the way music is created completely, if that makes sense. So even though musicians might not be threatened, I just believe there's going to be a new type of musician coming, and they should be threatened by them rather than technology, if that makes sense. When it comes to market opportunities, when it comes to who's going to take the production assignment, who's going to work for that artist, is my assumption. I don't know, but that's the parallel I can create myself. Does that make sense? Like, does it resonate a bit with you, or?
It does. It does. I can agree with you on that. I would still think that despite those changes, my take is that both the more traditional approach to music making and this new novel way of creating music will probably coexist. You raised an interesting question as well, which by talking about your son, which made me think of, well, how would or could potentially these tools affect music education in the future, right? And you have other. If we start diverging a little bit away from tools like Suno, or Udio, that do what we call audio music generation, prompt-based audio music generation. You do have other tools, AI-based tools, that are used sometimes or currently in high school for music music teaching. I'm talking about tools like Rave, if you're familiar with it, or Newton, which are AI tools that work on the timbre space. So a use case would be you would give this model a melody from a violin, and you would ask it to morph it into some sort of crazy sound that you've trained your model with. And if we start seeing the AI in music, I also think and know that due to, well, the mediatic press and the sheer size of what's behind these companies, Suno and Udio have been dragging the dialogue around themselves. But I would like to also take the opportunity to say that there's way more in the AI and music space than just Suno and Udio. And many of these tools can be seen as more easy to integrate in this traditional workflow. Hence why I'm saying that I'm positive that both worlds could coexist, because yes, Suno and Udio are super amazing, powerful tools these days, disruptive tools. But in this space, you also have tools that are more catered towards the traditional workflow and that musicians are exploring and also investing in. And sometimes as someone that is very, very keen on both the music side and the AI side of things, it pains me a little bit to see, or it saddens me a little bit to see that maybe the debate is getting so inflated because, well, we are focusing so much in this audio generation bubble that we are maybe giving a bad name to everything else around. Not that they have a bad name, but you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I totally understand. And again, I'm just in the moment right now, and going back to the development use case, again, that's sort of where I'm right now. There's this new product on the market called Lovable, which is basically they build full products just through prompts. And then there's Cursor that I use, which is much more like, it's still programming, it's still terminal, it's still like local deployments. And the interesting reflections about that is that any developer would still choose the tools that are AI enabled, where they have the freedom. Because at the end of the day, if you want to build something really meaningful, really stable, really scalable, the influence on every single detail of decision can be very, very important. And I think that goes back to creativity in music. Like going back to, traditional producers, Quincy Jones just died. Like he was not a one-man army. Like he knew how to direct. And modern day Quincy Jones might not direct, full orchestra or like a big band, or the same way you might, produce a lot of tools, so that makes sense, but still with the same intent.
Mm-hmm.
And if it talks about making good music that sustains for a long time, but brings something new to the market, I think the intent of the creator, even what he disposes of talent or opportunities, is just so incredibly important. And I don't think that AI will take that away, but it will definitely eliminate, in my opinion, the midsection, like the people where they don't have a lot of intent, they're just good at it, to some degree. I don't think there's going to be room for that in the market. I think if you want to exist in music, you really got to mean it, if that makes sense. That's my opinion.
I agree with you as well, and I would go even further as to, um, so if we focus, for example, on also trying to think of or discussing a little bit this distinction between the AI being some sort of creative entity or a tool. If you think of the applications of an AI in music as what people are more comfortable in calling a tool. The work of producers and engineers in editing, for example, those types of tasks, often boring tasks. I don't know, in metal drumming, for example, it's very common that you spend some time very meticulously aligning everything perfectly to the grid. That's, in my opinion, it's a bit of a boring task. I'm not a producer, but I've seen some people work it. It feels boring. So if you have some sort of system, intelligent AI system that does that, I would call it an AI and music system. I would still think that it improves everyone's lives, maybe but the guy that spends his day doing that. But even him or she, there might be some time saved there that could be put potentially into some more creative tools. um I think it's also important to understand that these are tools at the end of the day. I still struggle with the notion, especially knowing what's under the hood, the notion of giving some sort of sentience to these machines. Well, I'm not saying it it wouldn't be possible in the future, but as someone that kind of knows the insights of these things, it's still a bit weird to think of them as some sort of you know, an entity that has creativity built in, or intention, if you will. But on the other hand, this also raises super interesting philosophical debates, right? If you can imitate something to the point that no one can distinguish it, are you is that enough for authenticity, or no? How does someone uh, deal with these super incredibly uncanny valley feeling realistic tools?
So I kind of like to make predictions, and one thing I'm playing with right now is I believe that in the future with music, the human needs a reason to be there. And let me explain. Um, right now, when you see a concert or perform music, you would expect there's multiple instrumentalists somewhere there. But I believe as technology gets more and more ingrained in people's life, people need the focal point, the relationship point, which means I believe actually the individual becomes even more important. So if there's someone on stage, or if there's someone human playing something, like, why are you playing it? Why are you not using the machine? And you need that intent. And oftentimes the artist is like an obvious answer is you need someone uh, for the storytelling to resonate with you. You need another human being in order for their lyrics, their music to resonate with you. Um, and I think honestly that's gonna happen as technology gets more ingrained. If you really want to think like Elon Musk and Neuralink and everything, I think that's going to be even more important. But that also means that, again, coming back to my point, I think people need to know why they're doing what they're doing. Like I went to very prestigious music schools. I have a bachelor's and master's in some of the best institutions in Europe. And even there, people didn't know why they were doing it. Just like, well, it's everything I love. Like, sure, okay, fine. But, and then what? Like, there wasn't enough intent in my world to survive what's going to happen. And I think that's going to be the survivors. That is the people who can be a focal point, have something strong to tell, have a reason to be there in the music and tell that story. I might be taking it too far, but that's sort of how it's seen right now. Like good enough is not going to be good enough. Like it needs to be best.
But it's very interesting, that point. But I wonder, um, are we talking about the music business, or making a living out of music, or music per se, or both? One argument of, well, at least one story that I like to tell myself when thinking about these problems that you raised is chess. So chess is one of the paradigms of AI, and in the late 90s, so we cracked it. Machines are way better at playing chess than we will ever be able to, and that did not stop humans from playing chess. Quite the contrary. It has still a very strong interest on this activity, and we have even gotten better from by learning a few tricks from the machines, I believe. I don't know if it's comparable or exactly comparable to music, because again, we're talking about different things. We're talking about art here. Um, I would say, as a musician, I'm okay with doing music just because I like it. It may be a very unsatisfying answer, but just as a guitar player, for example, sometimes just the act of the physical activity of playing the strings, touching the strings, the muscles, and having the pleasure of nailing a passage from A to Z seamlessly, at least I like to think, that gives me some sort of reward that I appreciate. This is a very biological inspired overview on what music maybe is doing to me, but I think that something can exist just by the fact that people enjoy it, and not necessarily because they have this new entity there that could potentially do everything that you just did better than yourself. It will probably be a bit shocking and demotivating at first, but I don't think that will kill humans' desire or humans' pleasure from music. But that's on the music making side of things. If we're talking on the other side of the spectrum, which is when you need to make money out of that, when it's a business, when you need to be the best, or your revenue or income depends on the quality and your efforts, that's a different story. And that I can meet you halfway. And halfway because it's, I believe, still a bit hard to um, define what is better or worse in musical terms, at least from what I from how I see it. Of course, you said something interesting in at first, which is quantity, the quantity argument, which is of course, I mean, with the tools that we have right now, no human musician can compete with an AI in terms of quantity. If I start doing 24/7 music making, it's impossible. It's not the same scales. But then I guess quality will also come in a way, and sometimes not even quality, just how pristine is your production, how innovative your ideas are. Sometimes you just want an artist to do something for you, or you commission an artist just because of that particular subject, of that particular subjectivity on that particular human, I think. Uh, and that, sure, could be mimicked by a machine pretty easily, even. But I mean, if you can, why would you have, if you can hire Hans Zimmer to do music for you, why would you train a machine learning model to perform Hans Zimmer for you, if not for the business side of things? That's my take on it. Of course, I'm downplaying the money side here. I'm just trying to make a very clear divide into, well, money is at the end of the day the main issue, because I still think that if that's not the case, money, accessibility, I would still prefer a human taking the lead, a human producing the art, because at the end of the day, it's human art. These machines are mimicking human art.
You talked about chess, and I don't know chess that well. I've seen the Gambit or whatever it's called, and I live in Norway, so Magnus Carlsen is obviously a talking point. So, but that's the extent I know about chess. But I do know about running a lot, just because I used to do that, and I'm very passionate about it. So, this might be a stretch, but I'm just trying to sort of create an analogy. Why do I enjoy running? If someone was biking, they would do it faster. Is that a car or a plane? Like, it's not about speed. What is it? Well, in reality, it's about feat or storytelling or mastery to some degree. Like,
Mastery.
when I look at, I live 20 kilometers from Sandnes, where Jakob Ingebrigtsen, which is probably the world's best runner right now. And why have I followed him for 10 years? Just because it's such an interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not connected to his running times. I'm not connected to anything but the story of this 11-year-old kid to start running with his big brothers. They're European champions, and then he comes 10 years later and is the best in the world. So why do I enjoy running? Because it's incredible storytelling. It's about people going out of the ghettos, and people coming out from poor countries with nothing and becoming a global icon. So I think to a big degree, you can argue music the same way. That it's not about being quote unquote the best or the most impressive or the cleanest mix. It's about being a person that people can grab the story to and fall in love with. But without being professional runners, they would not be able to dedicate the time and effort to become those. And I think that's the key thing for me. And that is why I agree with you that the finances is essential, because any person that has that special thing needs years and years and years of cultivating it.
Yeah.
And without money, that's simply not going to happen. Um, so I think actually at the core of everything, money is the issue, because money enables dedication. Money enables that journey to create that storytelling, if that makes sense.
It does. Although you touched upon, well, the need of money for some sort of music education, let's say, for you to become proficient of some sort of musical activity. Um, that I would argue is another very positive use case for AI in democratizing um, access to music, not to music making per se, but for example, there are works. We have some people working on that at our center, where AI tutors for music. Once again, not eliminating the need for a human to conduct and correct some sort of mistakes, but maybe making it easier for you or more engaging for you to learn things that you want to learn, instead of practicing the same scale a bunch of times, practice the same techniques, and at the same time keep the same engagement as you would. And those strike me as nice positive use cases for AI in this space.
No, I agree. Barrier of entry, but also creativity and how people learn. And I think your research in sort of guitar tabloid must have covered some of this. Like, what was some of the findings you did in your research when it comes to learning or understanding the instrument, or how people adapted to the traditional way of learning music, but through technology? What was your observations there?
It was not a particular focus of my PhD, the learning side of things. I do think that on that topic, I would like to highlight that in our space, in our AI and music research, it's very common to distinguish between the subfield that I mostly work on, what we call the symbolic side of things, where you use MIDI, tablatures, sheet music to represent, to abstract musical information into some sort of data features that can be understood by a machine, or the audio side of things, where you use spectrograms or raw waveforms. I personally think, well, I have to kind of believe this. I'm a bit biased towards this, but I think there's a lot of value in working these symbolic approaches, mostly because if you want to render this, if you want to interact with this, hardly you would listen to a MIDI file on its own, commercially, professionally. Experience a MIDI file with a VST um, without anything else on it is maybe, or most of the times, a bit machinic. So working on this symbolic domain often leaves space for an extra human collaboration. On the side of education, this would be the next steps of my PhD. Sadly, it's only 4 to 5 years. But one thing I was very interested in was precisely what I was telling you before. So with tablatures, we have not only what notes are played, but where those notes are played in the instrument. Because the guitar, contrary to the piano, you have different ways of playing the same notes. And with these tablatures, or my work, you also have ways of capturing different ways that you can play a given note, different techniques. Are you just hammering on, doing some sort of legato? Are you palm muting? Are you using some sort of more advanced technique like the tapping, for example, or bending a string? These sort of specific our guitar-specific playing techniques are well captured by these format, the tablatures, not so much by traditional scores, sheet music, or even MIDI. And MIDI is the standard for most of the research in these AI symbolic music space. So my journey was a little bit. Of course, this was not a journey done alone, but was try to take the focus a little bit from MIDI, which, don't get me wrong, is great, and a lot of progress on the field was done because MIDI is so ubiquitous and because we have so many tools and packages and scripts that work on MIDI. But I was always very surprised when thinking about researchers in our community or people engaged in our community. I would argue always that we would probably have as many piano players as guitar players, and but there was a massive discrepancy in terms of research done uh, focusing the piano and the guitar. I think historically because the piano would be easier to model, precisely because of that one-way direction between a cymbal and the note on the instrument. But on the guitar side of things and the education side of things, tablatures, I think with the work I've done, it's possible, or the next steps would be to cater to a student's needs or interests, musical interests. For example, you like a specific type of music, and your guitar tutor told you to practice scales until your fingers bleed. But instead of that, maybe you can practice the same motions in some sort of Metallica kind of adaptation of riffs, or I don't know, maybe if you're into jazz, over some jazz chords and some jazz passades that kind of alleviate a more boring approach to the instrument. And those ideas could be extended further to the point where you'd have a system that could perhaps assess how well you do in terms of guitaristic features, how much are you able to keep steady on the beat, how consistent are you when attacking notes, and provide you solutions and recommendations for studying approaches, I would say.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of valid points. It's really interesting. When you talk about tablature and I play guitar when I was younger, and I was in Guitar Pro all the time and try to learn. But the truth of, at least when I used it, but let's call it 13 years ago, 14 years ago, was it was difficult to know what to do. Like even the knowledge about what I need to learn. And I think maybe, again, to the point, going back to AI as sort of like a more democratized access of creating things, I think we also need to make it easier to access learning in order to keep the joy of playing the instrument. Like the same way that social media might have sort of given some sort of dopamine addiction to people, I think to some degree, learning also needs to adapt to that. Like people, we can't just expect that people have the same amount of patience and diligence that they used to have. Like I like academics to some degree. Like I have 8 years now in my Belgian academics, even though I've always been working full time on the side. Finish out my second master's now, but I believe it's a hopeless form of learning. Like honestly, some people might be able to, but just looking around at my classmates or just people around me, like this is not adapted to how people learn now. Like my almost embarrassed to say, but my primary source of learning is TikTok. Honest to God, my whole algorithm is comedy and learning. That's it. Um, and that is my source of learning. And then if I want to go to something, go deep, I listen to a podcast. Like I don't open a book. I don't, when I sit at a class, I'm just bored. And that's also the negative side of technology to some degree, and dopamine rush and whatnot, is I'm not receptive to that type of learning anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That needs to be taken consideration into the future instrumentalists as well. Like, how would they be receptive to learning the joy of an instrument and maybe becoming an exceptional craftsman, then can be a storyteller. But I'm just going to assume, and you would know a lot more than me, that needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Definitely. And you touched on a lot of interesting points. And if we want to bring AI into the equation, I think the educational system is, uh, along with the healthcare system, probably the two main systems where AI can be more impactful. There are many studies that show that when you have a one-on-one tutoring system versus being immersed in a class, your results are often better. with this one-on-one approach. AI kind of enables this to some extent. Like yourself, I do spend a lot of time engaging and trying to extract knowledge or learning, if you want, from tools like ChatGPT or Claude, and just by having this one-on-one kind of conversation with this machine that I can prompt and ask. Well, sometimes it's just because I want to be or go as deep as I want, or ask the dumbest questions that I want to pose. Um, that's one of the points that I think will make a good use case for AI. On the music side of things, in if we want to trace back a little bit before the AI enters the picture, you already kind of see how musicians, well, I'm very biased and deep into the guitar space, but you see, especially I would say in the last 10, 15 years, you have witnessed a next level of guitar playing. And it's often from people that, they come up online, they are on Instagram, or they come up on YouTube with amazing shops, and what used to be these guitar icons from the late 80s, the late 90s, that had impeccable technique. They would do these master classes and record these videos, all that information, because I believe because everything is so readily available now, either on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, you can so easily pick up a lick, see someone playing, you replay it so many times. I think that impacts and impacts the learning and the quality of the performance that we have right now. And you can see that with this new generation of guitar players with crazy skills that are very unusual to what a traditional electrical guitar player would be accustomed to. So I think we are entering that stage that you are talking about, that people are getting more knowledge, quicker access to knowledge, and those results are showing now. On the downside of it, I think you also touched a very important point, which is we struggle now. I struggle for sure, spending time quieting down, grabbing something that would require my attention undisclosed, for like uninterrupted for long periods of time. Books are, I would say, the perfect example for this. I think I still read a lot, uh, but the distractions are definitely there, and it's hard for, maybe if you're not as disciplined, the trade-off between getting your knowledge for something so interactive and fast-pacing as TikTok, for example, versus a book, is hard to justify. And of course, I still think that you have unique and valuable information in books. It's definitely worth spending the time reading there. I have great time reading it, but I do understand when some people that maybe are not as like-minded tell me, look, I can have the same information with interactive TikTok videos. And if I'm mostly curious about that approach as well, and I think there's benefits in both. But at the end of the day, I think what this prompts is, again, a shift in paradigm brought by technology.
Yeah, it is an interesting space. And I think what I get from this conversation today is that there's most likely going to be a place for love for music. Maybe the approach to learning will be different. It sounds like it's still quite unknown for everyone I talk with, also you, with like what are the financial implications and what are the practical implications of the financial implications in AI music. And I think it's very unknown. But again, the hypothesis I'm working with right now is I believe it will be somewhat close to the ones of developers. And the reason why I try to take that angle is when I do my research on music financing, startups, whatever, it's just across the board. It's so hard to figure out what's happening. As you say yourself, there was not a lot of research on guitar and MIDI. If you just look at the industry as a whole, there's not a lot of research in music. Like if you look at just, compared to what there is in any other industry, gaming, medtech, whatever, it's still a small field, which means it's also really hard to have a fast-paced moving academia and prediction on what the future will bring. That's at least my theory. So for me, it's easier to bring parallels to where there is a lot more talk about it, where the most clever people in the world go out and make statements. And that is the belief that I have within development is, might be wrong, but there's a lot of people who think this as well, is that the developer as we know them will be gone in 5 years. I don't believe that rings true to music, but I'm going to assume there's a good part of it that will ring true to music, which I think the separation between the musician, professional musician, amazing craftsman, and the hobbyist is going to go even further. And everything in between is going to belong, practically speaking, to the hobbyist category. That the entrance into the professional craftsman storyteller is going to be even harder. That's my assumption. I might be wrong. Because of the financial constraints that will be in the middle.
That for me, the analogy with programmers leads me to, again, the more functional side of music making, if you will, which it is an important aspect, an important chunk of all music making, for sure. I tend to have also a more maybe brighter, positive take on it. Maybe it will be like chess in the sense that it will make us be better musicians as well, in a sense, to overcome. So if the threshold is so high these days, maybe it will just push us to be even better composers, performers, arrangers. I think that also, how should I phrase this? From a musical perspective, if say, for example, you as a musician, a performer, a live performer, there's still this threshold right now that no one is, at least from now, from what I've seen, debating or talking too much about it, which has to do with the AI isn't yet at the stage where a live or a session musician would feel threatened. Well, maybe not a session musician, a live musician. So it's hard still to contemplate or imagine robots getting on stage and performing music in traditional instruments like humans do. But there are already projects. There's this collective from Germany, Compressor Head, which is very focused on making robots perform very, very accurately live. So in a sense, I think that it will probably create the divide that you mentioned. Maybe playing music will get into a higher level once again. At least that was the promise as well, I think, when streaming platforms came around, because, well, revenues from CDs took a little bit of a hit. So the promise was back then that, music making, live shows, this will be the new means of substance. So the same argument could potentially be put here in the AI space. But just to wrap up this or my little futurology, one thing that I also like to think of is, with these particular models that are very good at digesting and finding patterns in all the music that we have made, there's still one caveat to them, is that they're only trained on everything that existed, right? So could this potentially push artists to reinvent themselves, to try to merge, create new genres, create new, bolder approaches to music, things that are not in the data set, things that span out of the data set? Of course, you could try to generate them with the AI tools. Most of them are catered to these amalgamation of genres, but that's coming from the artists themselves and trying to blend or run away from what the tools are able to provide could be an interesting aspect of it. And you also have artists that are very experimental and exploratory in this space, in the AI music. Databots have been paving the way for us all in terms of creativity with AI in the music space. Their work, I think, is very inspirational. I would recommend everyone to check them out if you're not familiar with it. Um, and that's the role of AI in music that I like to think of. It's definitely something to augment our artistic capabilities, even pushing it towards experimental avenues more than just reproducing the same kind of thing that we've been doing, just that we do it faster or quicker or cheaper. Um, in a way, it's like sampling is often the argument that comes to mind, right? When it first came out, are we just grabbing things from some other artist, putting them, twisting it a little bit and calling it our own, or is this actually a valid means of expression, an artistic tool that you can use and make your practice with? I kind of like to think that, but once again, I'm a bit biased because I'm an active part of this space.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I appreciate so much your thoughts and sharing here on this podcast. I'm left with the one last analogy, sort of because I got a bit inspired by what you said. And that is, I'm going to refer back to my. I like to talk about, again, as we said, quantity can feed into quality. And when I got into my bachelor's degree in music production, that particular school, the average age of getting in was 26 because they didn't necessarily value musicianship, but more intent and artistic expression. And when I came in, I was a bit younger than the others, and let's be honest, I wasn't very great at music either. So I didn't really. Well, I love that I got in, but I was very different from my classmates. They had won like Danish Grammys, like they're big producers. That's sort of that school, and in those 3 years, also the 2 years after, a different educational institution, I barely worked on music. I just worked on storytelling. I just worked on what do I want to say. And I never became good at music. Like, I'm not a good musician. I'm a pretty decent singer. But again, I'm not good at music. But I've been relatively successful with my music explorations as manager, producer, publisher, and now as entrepreneur. And what did I learn? I learned how to say something. And my point is, I believe that AI will make the impressiveness of skills much less and really just get back to the core. So if the machine can do so much of what used to impress you, so what do you have to say then? What's your story?
No.
And this is where I believe that people consciously or subconsciously, through society or through expectations, will be forced to have something to say in order to be relevant for anyone.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it gets interesting, because that people at quantity are forced to have quality in storytelling in order to make great music. And then you want to take that picture, then there might be amazing artists coming from AI because they're just forced to be a better version of that storyteller. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. If I understand it correctly, and I do agree with you, it's probably a means for us to augment our storytelling skills, no matter the craft, I would say. So you kind of make the craft less shiny, but you do put the emphasis on storytelling. And to be fair, I think that's could potentially be a different paradigm of musical quality, if this makes any sense. One where proficiency or prowess is not as valid anymore, but the story behind it, the concept, the way you frame it, I like that. I personally less and less value the what I call like the brute aesthetics, how technical you are, and or the technicality of your productions or your music or your skills as a musician, but more what comes out of it, the story that you tell at the end of the day, like you phrased it. So I definitely think that this could potentially kickstart some sort of divide on that space as well. And also, I think that we might have tools that could potentially help us um, become better storytellers by giving us new pens to write, if you want the analogy to be like that, like new tools um, to use to convey what you're trying to convey. Not tools that you're accustomed to, not tools that do what you do, but faster, quicker, cheaper, but different tools, more exploratory tools. I think AI is very capable of doing that. I also think it's probably not the main use case these days because, of course, the bigger players are more interested in, I think, finding a space that caters to a larger number of people. But when that uh, is filled up, or when that is done, uh, the space for these more exploratory avenues and experimentalist approaches to AI music will emerge, and that's just new tools for this storytelling, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think, for every single person I talk with about this, it comes back to that thing, story. And obviously, I could also be leading and steering the conversation that way, but I don't sense I do that. I think that is the natural consensus around this is it will change. We believe that storytelling will be more important. Maybe you said brute aesthetics or craftsmanship will be less important. That will probably fundamentally change educational institutions or exposure to learning. That in turn will create a new generation of expressors. So I think if you look at it from that angle, AI does not need to be necessarily negative on a macro environment, but still have maybe the negative consequences on a personal, financial level for many people. But that's what disruption brings, and music is not the only industry that's going to be changed a lot. So, but Pedro, thank you so much for your talks. I think this has been really interesting. I hope that people go on LinkedIn and follow your work and your articles. And I believe what you're doing is super important. I've become a convert of academia, and I haven't always been that, but I do see that the importance of being thorough in understanding. So thank you, Pedro.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was great, Jacob.